Wow.
What's up?
Would you look at that? Would you look at that?
What? We in there.
Hey, hey, hey.
We in there. We in there.
Yeah. We back. Another live episode. Another week. Another great topic.
Facts.
This week we ain't gonna mess around with the hot topics. You know what I'm saying? We got a very, very, very heavy subject,
Right.
very serious subject. So we just gonna keep it at that today. If you've seen some of our ads and some of the posts that we've been making over the past week or so, and watch previous episodes, we've told you about this episode coming up.
Facts.
And this episode today is going to focus on, checking on your people, man. Episode 171, check on your people.
Check
And,
on. Check on.
and what we mean by that is it's a lot of people out here that are suffering in silence, man. And, unfortunately, a lot of people only check on people when they need something.
Right.
And we got to get out of that habit. We gotta check on people because we truly love them and we truly care about their well-being. Stop being so selfish, y'all. It's okay to be selfish a little bit here and there, but if you really care about the people around you, you gotta reach out and you gotta
I agree.
connect with people, man, on a regular basis. But before we get into all that, y'all know we gotta check on our people here to make sure they're good before we even get going. So we got our lovely guest, Lauren Pierre. She's joining us today. She's our resident expert.
Yes.
That's a strong word.
Yeah, well,
I mean, she been on the show a few times already, so she be dropping them jewels. So
you're one of the experts that we bring in when we have subjects like this because we need somebody on here talking about the subject that actually knows about it. Like we know a little bit and we can talk about things, but we're not the expert here. So we
just do our Googles.
There's nothing wrong with Google if you're going in the right direction. Some people don't know how to use it appropriately.
I mean,
but I'm actually going to give you all some resources today so people can look in the right direction.
Fact. I did that. I did. But some folks, reading comprehension ain't no level 10.
That's true.
They be reading stuff and,
they be reading, but they don't be comprehending.
Correct.
That's a fact. So,
right.
So Ms. Pierre, how are you feeling today? How are you doing?
How am I doing? You should expect honest answers when you ask therapists how we're doing. We're not going to give you, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. I'm actually a little annoyed today, and it's directly related to work. But part of accepting annoyances or part of managing annoyances, accepting things that are out of your control. So I'm trying very hard to accept things that are out of my control today. And that's it.
And keep laughing at the neighbors.
See, not everybody knows what you're talking about, bitch.
She's got some interesting neighbors, y'all. So if you're privy to her social media postings, then you can kind of get a clue into what we're talking about. But she has some interesting neighbors, and they take her on some adventures a little bit. You know what I'm saying? So she just reports to us what she sees and what she observes, and it's pretty hilarious.
It's hilarious.
I might say
it's hilarious. Yes,
I told you I'm gonna give them a break because I don't want y'all thinking negatively about my neighbors. So
I want us to kill the neighbors because we be looking for content, laughing at people. So.
All right. So Benji Banks, the man, the brand. How you doing today, my guy?
I'm doing good, man. I don't have no complaints, man. But sometimes when you're in that space, where you're trying to balance off everything that you got going on, and it's like, Lord, I need to make X, Y, and Z today because yesterday was amazing. And then today you get to a day like today, and you make a little less than what you made yesterday. So it's like a balancing thing. You know what I mean? So like you're trying to balance all of that, balance the emotion with all of that stuff. But I will say something, it was a little funny today. I kind of reminisced a little bit about something that happened when I was a young kid. And that was kind of the perspective I took on it to kind of deal with it was very positive. So, and I'm proud of myself for that. You know what I mean? I took a positive twist to some emotions. So I'm proud of myself.
Okay, yeah. Well, every now and again, you got to give yourself some credit. You know what I'm saying, for the things that you do and the thing and the way you handle things, because all too often we're, I think a lot of times we're too hard on ourselves,
I agree.
right? You know what I'm saying? We're too critical of the things that we do, and I keep telling people all the time, man. I took some classes last year, some Dale Carnegie classes,
Hmm.
and one of those classes, you know what I'm saying, the focus of it was day tight compartments, which means just focus on one day at a time. That's all you
Right.
can focus on. Don't focus on yesterday. Don't focus on tomorrow. Focus on today. So
Yes.
every day when you get up, it's like you hit the reset button.
Hmm.
So, you can't do it all the time, of course, in a perfect world, yes, but it's just the thought of, making the attempt to do it.
Hmm.
So it's helped me a lot, man. It's helped take a lot of pressure off of me, not looking for, what I'm gonna do next week when I don't even know what I'm doing today.
Fact. Fact. Right.
So, but yeah, man, I mean, for people out there who are having issues with that, try that, man. Just try waking up every morning and focusing on that day, writing it down, what your goals are for that day. And, then you can, toward the end of the day, then you can start looking at tomorrow a little bit. But
Right.
that morning when you wake up, there's nothing you can do about tomorrow. There's nothing you can do about yesterday. Only
Facts.
today.
Fact. Tomorrow got its own worries laced with it. So don't jump in it too much. What's going on, boy?
What's up, guys?
What's up? What's up?
How goes it?
Did you
Hi.
just call her forehead?
He's always calling me something because he's got his man piece brought down a little bit. So, his forehead is a little minimized. So then he likes to attack other individuals. But it's all good.
I mean, this is all natural.
I love
That's
juices and
right.
berries.
Juices and berries.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But it's all right, though. It's all right, though. We sell hair now, so,
I saw that. Yes.
yeah,
It
so
will.
we getting everybody right. Pretty soon we're going to have man units in that joint like Ken
There you
has.
go.
So when his hair goes away, you won't know it because he'll have a man unit.
He's going to slap a unit on and he can get it put on right there in house. He got people right there.
See,
Bang.
God already setting your boy up.
Look at all this promotion. All this promotion.
All right. Well, Trisha Michelle, you're perfectly timed in your arrival. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Just a busy day. Some stuff jumped up. Had a little curveball. So, when the mind gets a lot going on. So that happens. Curveball happens, but I'm here and, I'll handle what I got to handle in a little bit, but I'm here right now. And that's matters.
That's what's
I
up.
dig
That's
it. I
what's up.
dig it.
See, that's that
And,
adulting.
and she got her
Adulting
hair
in you.
done too. Look at her, y'all. She's
Oh,
fly
This
yeah.
guy.
out there. She's spiffy out there. You know what
This
I'm saying?
guy.
Right.
Well, like I said, we welcome everybody that's joining us again today. Episode 171. Check on your people. We
Yes.
are advocating for you to check on your people because we're going to be talking about a topic today that affects us all in some shape or form.
Right.
This month is Suicide Prevention and Awareness
Prevention.
Month, and we always want to draw attention to these things and dedicate an episode to these worthy causes because people need to know.
Right.
And again, we have to go get experts on the subjects and people who can talk intelligently on it without just us going to Google. So, so we got Lauren Pierre joining us, and
Yeah.
she's going to be giving us some answers and some information that could help us on our daily journey, and help us, and so we can help others around us as well.
Facts.
So, Lauren, can you talk to the audience a little bit about your background for a minute? Just to let them know who you are and why we got you on the show. What are your credentials?
Oh goodness, I feel like I should be more prepared for this little elevator pitch every time we do it. But let's see a little bit about my background. So I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Georgia. Right now, I'm only licensed in Georgia. I have a specialty in addiction, and I also have a specialty in trauma. And spent the first half of my career working directly in addiction treatment facilities. Most of my work has been either inpatient or in residential settings. And I recently went into private practice last year. So now I have a completely virtual private practice where I see clients individually and offer group services.
Well, all right now. Well, all right now.
Oh, and I'm also doing therapy journals. So I'm working on that.
And that's a round of applause right there.
E-books or anything like that, or just therapy journals?
Well, right now I have a digital therapy journal that's on Etsy, but it's designed specifically for people who are already in therapy. So it's supposed to kind of follow you and companion you through your therapy process. So it's not like a take home and you do prompted journal entries. It's not like that. It's set up so that every time you have therapy, there's something you're supposed to be doing in that journal related to your therapy session.
Right. Like, I dig it.
Okay. Well, that's dope, and we appreciate you giving us that background information, so people understand that you're not just somebody who's just talking. Like, you actually know what you're talking about.
She ain't just throwing advice out on social media and acting. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
She went through the schooling, to get licensed and certified.
We'll say that part again because I don't think people respect it. The time that we have to give, like it's not just the academic piece and the degrees. We have to have so many years of experience and so many supervised hours before the state will approve us to do this and charge people privately. And you have to take a state test and you have to pass that. So there's a lot of moving parts.
Shout out to the private practice, because currently right now we're pushing that same thing. My wife has the private practice looming, and we're pushing that idea, trying to add 5, counselors and MFTs and so forth onto the business. So we're in that space right now. So seeing it on my end, how it works and how I appreciate it, because all the schooling and all the hours and all the stuff you guys have to put in to get credentialed. It takes a lot of work. So kudos and shout out to that for one.
Thank you.
Yeah, she didn't come to us from TikTok University.
Right.
That's where most people get their information from nowadays. And then
but don't get me wrong, I do have a TikTok account and I have posted videos related to mental health. So
but
it's not all
but you're an expert.
Got the license to speak these things.
At least because from what I understand, in that space, you guys particularly have like a counseling Bible, they would call counseling journal, correct? Where you every time you refer to it all the time, right?
I think you're probably talking about the DSM. Have you heard that?
Yes, the DSMs. Yes.
Yeah. Here's my trusty DSM 5th edition, which is the most recent, and this one is the one that was right before it. So you're gonna see one or both of these in a therapist's office somewhere.
Right. They got to go and they got to follow that like it's their Bible, right? Like all the codes, everything you have in there is in there. So
yeah, I remember when she was on before, she mentioned DSM codes. So can you talk to us a little bit about what that means? Because we often play that clip and a lot of people view that clip and gain information from that clip. So what is a DSM code?
Oh goodness. So the DSM stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness or Mental Health Disorders. And there's a code for every mental health diagnosis, just like there's a code for every medical issue that you have. And that code is for the insurance companies, essentially. They decide how to pay you for certain diagnoses. And I'm going to try to say this without bias because I have a lot of feeling about it. But the insurance company is essentially deciding what mental illnesses or disorders they are willing to pay for treatment for. And they use those codes to determine how long they think the treatment should take and the level of treatment that you need. So those numbers are more because of third-party entities than they are anything else. And we really try to tell clients, the diagnoses are not even really for you all. It does help some people to understand what their symptoms are and to go, okay, there's a name for this. I'm not crazy. There's actually a thing I'm living with. That can be truly helpful. But for the most part, we don't want y'all walking around with this label over your head like, I am this. You're not
Right.
this thing. You just live with these symptoms. And
Right.
sometimes it can be very stigmatizing when lay people are using the language we're using, because then it can make people feel some type of way.
I would think so, right? Especially with and I think sometimes that happens because people aren't as astute, I guess is a proper word, on how to say a particular thing to a particular person. Like, I don't think the average person even knows how to address a person that might be suicidal. We would talk, just pray about it. You know what I mean? Just really, just pray for them, just pray about it. But when you're dealing with, a licensed therapist, you're trying to give them the proper language so that you don't just kind of label them as psychotic or crazy or something like that.
Right. And you'll hear a lot of people who they do find comfort in adopting their labels. And we still try to discourage against that. But again, if it's bringing you some kind of security, or if it's helping you understand yourself or accept yourself, nobody's going to tell you not to say it. But it's the difference between someone saying, I'm depressed versus I have depression or I live with depressive symptoms. The same thing with something like bipolar disorder. You'll hear a lot of people say, I'm bipolar versus I live with bipolar symptoms or I experience bipolar episodes. The language is less stigmatizing in one case than the other. So when you talk about suicide, there's a lot of special languages we use there. So in the recent years, they meaning the governing bodies that write the DSM and some of the governing boards for us, encourage us not to say things like committed suicide or attempted suicide. Now, this is for us. This is not for you all. You all can continue to use the language that makes sense for you, and nobody's going to correct you on that. But for us, we're encouraged to stay away from saying things like that. I choose to say things like took their own life, has thoughts about ending their life. The language just lands different.
Right.
And everybody's a little bit different. But over the years, I think they have been really careful about using less stigmatizing language. So you won't hear a lot of professionals say attempted suicide or committed suicide or things like that.
How helpful do you think is it for people to adopt a different language when dealing with people who, have their issues or have their struggles? Do you think that's important at all? Or how should a person approach that idea?
It's very useful, number one, because of just how we receive information as humans. Like, we all hear words, and the way we define a word speaks to us. And I'm going to throw something out there that's loosely associated, but you all are going to understand exactly why I'm doing this comparison. It's the difference that people use between saying like ignorant or stupid, and how those land differently, and people have different understandings of what they mean, and you can kind of provoke a different emotional response depending on what you're saying. So yes, language and delivery is hugely important in terms of how you're talking to somebody in this space. Are you responsible as a layperson to know what that should be? Not necessarily. Can you learn it? Yes, you can absolutely learn it, and you can practice it in your everyday language with people. But should you take on the burden of knowing exactly what those words are and what that language is? I don't know if that's as reasonable, but there are people who they're willing to put in the time and effort to say, I want to say this in a way that is respectful and honoring, and I want to be prepared. And that's fine.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always what they say. It's not what you say; it's how you say it.
Right.
So the words that you use in any part of your life is really important, especially when you're dealing with somebody who might not be in the best mental space. You know what I'm saying? So in a vulnerable space. So
Now, that being said, when we get into the conversation about how to support and how to talk to someone, you might be surprised at what I say you can say. You're gonna be like, hey.
okay, yeah, we definitely gonna get to that. Before we get deep into it, now I wanted to preface some things because like we do our Googles, so I always try to do a little backlog, a little research, and see what things I can find. And one interesting thing I definitely wanted to look up is the suicide rate since the pandemic, because that's always a topic that comes up around suicide, and the pandemic changed so much, and had so many people in a different mental state coming out of it, right? Because we had never experienced anything like that in our lifetime. So, it was one of those things where nobody knew what was going to be the next steps and how people would respond to being, in the house for that long or being isolated for that long.
Right.
So, but the research I found in 2023, suicide rates reached its highest peak since 1941, and this is according to the Psychiatric Times April 24 article. The article also said that men are nearly 4 times as likely to commit suicide than women, but women are experiencing the largest increase in numbers in recent years.
Right.
So that was kind of that was kind of a hard thing to read. It's like, guys, 4 times as much. But when I think about it, as a man, now women would would argue that their lives are much harder, much more difficult. But and I'm not gonna argue back and forth about any of that. But I know as a man, the burden that we carry of having to be responsible for so much, and even if we're not, the I guess the perception of what a man is and what he's supposed to be doing carries a lot of weight as well. I'm not saying that that's part of the reasoning, but to me it seems like it's a likely part of it.
I can
But
see that.
but yeah, again, I'm not the expert. I
Right.
just I just found that piece of information. We have an expert here who can talk to us intelligently about that. So with those rates, is that something that you were already aware of, Lauren, or is this something that you can talk to us about?
Yeah, in my experience, unbeknownst to most people, men have always had the higher rates of suicide, and their method of suicide has always been the more brutal, is the word that I kind of think of. So, men historically are more likely to do things like use a gun, or something else that seems more brutal, whereas women very commonly will use something like pills, something painless, to kind of transition out. But men historically have had higher rates. And I'm glad you mentioned men, because Black men in particular have 30% higher rates.
Mhm.
And I want to say that's a statistic from the CDC. So if anybody wants to look, the CDC is one of the first line of defense that we use in terms of getting stats for suicide in this country, as well as some other mental health issues. But men have always had higher rates than women. Black men and boys, 30% higher. And something that we have to keep in mind, and we'll probably flush this out later, is the different ways that you have to think about suicidal ideations. Because to your point, Ken, there are some life stressors that can contribute to suicidal ideation. Socioeconomic hardship is a big part of that. Most people just think of depression. Most people just think, okay, you have a depressive diagnosis of some kind, because having suicidal ideations is one of the criteria and endorsement in several of the depressive diagnoses. But outside of having a pathological diagnosable code, you have socioeconomic hardship, you have trauma, you have change of life transitions. There are all these other things that could create suicidal ideation that are not directly related to a mood disorder.
Right.
And sometimes people don't even think about that. So when you think about the rate for men, you can in fact think about what are the pressures that this man was dealing with in his life, what socioeconomic hardships, what major life transitions, all of those things play into it.
Right. And then not only society tells them that they can't be sad, you can't cry, you can't do these things, but you're also taught to just be quiet about it. So I can see that higher and why.
Yeah.
And that's a good point that you just made, because, and I think, Ken, you were talking about that too. Men don't always use the resource of mental health support via counseling or therapy or medication because of whatever the previous messaging and narrative that they've received about being a man in therapy. Right. So they aren't as likely to take advantage. Now that is improving. I'm gonna give
Yes.
y'all a shout out.
Yes.
Men are
Yes.
doing a lot better with that, but historically, they are less likely to take advantage of therapy and medication.
I know it's a lot of it has to do with how we were raised, so to speak. But why do you think men are now getting that help that we weren't getting before? Do you think it's simply because the avenues have opened up to us, or what would you say why men are actually starting to get that help or reach out for that help?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is because they see and hear other men doing it.
Okay.
So the more that men make it okay, the more men talk about therapy, the more men explore therapy in podcasts and talk about it in interviews, the more people who are well known who do interviews and write books and talk about therapy, the more accepting men are going to be about it. And just like anything, we respond to people that look like us.
Right.
So
Right.
the more I see someone that looks like me doing this and they're saying it's okay, and I see them benefiting from it, then you have more men who are leaning towards it. Now, there are probably other reasons as well, but that's the
Right.
very first one that I would say.
I would say the same as well, because I can't remember the first time I thought about therapy. I want to say it was a buddy of mine, Purvis Taylor, and he mentioned it.
Mm.
And we grew up, in the same areas, and I didn't know he was a therapist at all, of course, and he started to talk about it. So it made it something, was like, oh, okay, let me check this out. And it kind of makes you get in that mode to go and look and check it out and see what it is. So I would totally agree with that.
And I don't know if you all know of any, but I'm gonna throw some names out there. I'm not being paid for any of these endorsements. They're just avenues I've heard of that clients of mine have recommended, or people that I'm aware of. So recently, I had a client put me onto a podcast called "All Black Men Need Therapy."
Hmm.
I can't tell you how long the podcast has been running. I do know it's facilitated by two brothers, and one of them is actively in therapy, and the other one admits that he's not. And they talk about their ideas and beliefs about therapy as they are living as Black men in the world. There's also an organization you all have heard me talk about before in other episodes called Counseling Brothers of Atlanta. So for those of you listening who live in Georgia or the surrounding Atlanta area, there's a whole network and group of Black men who provide services to Black boys and Black men. So the avenues are out there.
Right.
We don't always know where they are, so it's important that people share,
Right.
because we don't always kind of find those.
I think that's a big thing too that you both mentioned. We even with with our friend Purvis, is seeing for Black men, seeing another Black man that's a counselor, that's a therapist, because that's been the biggest thing before. Like my oldest son coming out of high school, he expressed an interest in going into that field, and I told him, hey, I asked him why, what's your reasoning, what's your rationale behind choosing that, and he was like, well, I feel like there's not a lot of us in that field, so that's why a lot of us don't go see them, because they don't want to go talk to somebody who they feel like don't understand,
Right.
what they go through. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Because if you're sitting up here talking to a man that didn't come from your area, that doesn't have your skin,
hood, your language, yeah.
like, and you're talking to him about things, he can say, he can tell you how to navigate things from a human standpoint, but specifically to what you need, he probably can't help you with that. So, and I think a lot of people feel more comfortable when they go and talk to somebody who looks like them.
Now, this is funny. It's interesting because it came to my mind while we were talking. There's a song called Time Taker by Ghetto Boys, and Scarface, in his analogy, is talking to a therapist or a doctor, and he's telling them all the trauma that he's dealing with. And he's asked the doctor, are you getting that? Like, do you understand that I come up in this type of neighborhood where every day I walk out, there's a killing. Every day there's a young boy who has to make a decision on whether it is to sell drugs or go to college or do this, and those options aren't there. And it's kind of interesting when you listen to him talk about the song, how he relates it and asks the doctor, do you even understand where I'm coming from? Is there any answers in your manila folder on what I'm asking you? And I always thought that was interesting because we see life as we deal with it. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm like I said, I mean, for me personally, I've had so many different experiences, and throughout my life that have, of course, molded me into the man that I am today.
Right.
But as an adult, there's been situations where I've had to, not only be an advocate for therapy on the show, but I was sitting here advocating for it and not understanding that I was suffering myself at a point.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an eye opener for me, because when somebody's on the show and they're talking about these signs and these things, I'm like, wait a
Right.
minute. I checked that box. I checked that box.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, maybe I need to get some help.
Right.
So it was eye opening for me. To hear these things, because I think a lot of times we look at other people's situation and we just say, man, that's messed up. They're going through this and they're going through that, and we don't even understand that we have our own issues that we need to iron out, and we can't handle them all.
Right.
Sometimes we need help. We need help with that. So a lot of people that take their own lives, they're suffering in silence, man, because they feel like nobody cares, nobody can, understand their load or what they're going through. So, I mean, I expressed before, to Lauren before the show, I had two my friends in the past couple of years commit suicide
Right.
or take their own lives, and we had two different ends of the spectrum. We had one that was saying things and doing things and exhibiting, behavior, and we were like, okay, we're a little worried about him. And then, unfortunately, some things transpired and he took his own life. The other one, on the other hand, we had no clue. Like,
Right.
everything seemed regular. Everything seemed to be the same as it usually always is. We talked to him one night, and then the next morning we get a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's one thing I wanted to ask Lauren about, is the signs. Like, what are some signs that we could look for, that could possibly tip us off to people who need help?
For sure.
So you would be surprised. There are some people who get to a point in their ideations where they are talking about it openly. And sometimes it can be unexpected and jarring to hear someone make comments about thinking about not existing, or just kind of wondering how their family would feel if they weren't here. And just sometimes having casual conversation about the impact it would have on other people if I was just gone. If,
Right.
if all of my ish and all of my stuff was no longer a problem, what would life be like? So sometimes it comes up as these very casual hypothetical scenarios, like what if, and I'm kind of thinking about, and I wonder what. But also, if you ever hear any language from someone where they're talking about experiencing unbearable pain, and it's typically emotional, like I can't deal with this world like this, and I just can't live in the world like this, and life is just too hard. Any language where you hear something that sounds like unbearable pain, or anytime you hear someone talking about feeling like a burden on others. Now, these individually, no, individually, you can't just assume that if you happen to hear someone talking about being a burden, they must be suicidal. No. But typically, the collection of some of these things, you hear two or three of these symptoms, or you see a couple of these behaviors, it's a fair assumption. So if they're talking about not existing and what life would be like for everyone else if they were gone, they're expressing feeling like a burden to people, if they describe unbearable pain, and then, even more severely, if they actually start making plans that you feel like they have not thought about, or you've not heard them discuss, like maybe they're developing a wheel and you haven't heard them talk about developing a wheel, they don't have a medical reason to be developing a wheel, if they start giving things away, and it seems like they're giving things away that are extremely precious to them and important to them, that can also be a sign. And then there's another sign that people don't often realize, but if you notice someone who's taking more risks with their life and it seems more entertaining or kind of playful for them, that can often be a sign. Taking more risks with their lives, putting themselves in more dangerous situations, and almost playing with the possibility of something ending their life. And sometimes that can sound like they're not actively attempting, but they will take a risk
Risk, yes.
knowing that they could possibly die. And it's like another pathway to suicide. And there's a name for that, and I can't remember what it's called. I think it used to be called assisted suicide or something like that, where you essentially use someone else to
Right.
end your life, use someone else or some other situation. I think it's more commonly used or heard when you talk about someone antagonizing police in a way where they know
Yeah.
they're going to shoot. Now, I'm going to tread lightly around that because there are other times we know that the police are just trying to
Right.
Antagonize.
Right.
But there are some cases where people will do something that they know will cause a police officer to set off their firearm so that they can do it. So, I mean, I could go on and on. There are other
There's a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like it's kind of in that space. It seems like it's glorified to a degree, right?
What
Like
is-
I'm doing something kind of erratic, putting my
Mhm.
life at risk, and then having people around you that kind of glorify it. Because I would think even if a person is a casual drug taker and then they're stepping up their drug intake to different drugs, that would kind of be like risk taking in a way too as well, right? Or no?
I think that's probably unique to each person and I think I might be a little bit biased because one of my specialties is in addiction.
Right.
So one thing we work on with men and women in recovery is being able to show themselves grace that most people did not start using drugs with the intention to become addicted.
Right.
And they were prepared for the trajectory of what addiction does to them. So when you find yourself in an addictive pattern, you will take more risks. And
Right.
part of that is because of what the drugs are doing to you. You're less inhibited.
Chemical imbalance, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Right.
you're less inhibited. There are a lot of chemical things going on. So you are willing to put yourself in places and with people that give you more access that you would never have done if you weren't using. Now, in those spaces, are there people who probably have thoughts about ending their lives? Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And are there people who have used their drug of choice to end their life? Yes.
Right.
But I would say, I don't know if I can make it too general, that just the increase in risky use itself means there's a suicidal intent. That increase in risky use could be part of their addiction.
Right.
They're looking for a higher high.
Chasing the high,
Yeah.
And I would think that that's kind of come from where we come from. I notice it because it's like the person is being a little bit more erratic with the drug that they're taking, and you start to notice the increase, and you're like, whoa. But I couldn't label it back then. You just notice the behavior is different. And so recognizing that is kind of crazy, but we didn't know how to address it back then. We just thought so-and-so was either being playful or that was just a norm with them. So addressing it and understanding it, I think, is critical to kind of getting someone to help, I would think.
And I just want to make sure people understand because, I don't want to assume people know what certain words mean. So when Lauren says suicidal ideations, that's just the idea of, what I'm saying, taking your own life. And a lot of people have ideas and a lot of people start making plans of how they could do it.
Right.
So, there's different levels to it. And that's what I wanted to ask about too. Like when you look at when a person is going through these things and things that you might be looking for, like what type of levels are there when you all are, looking at a patient and diagnosing them or, having a conversation with somebody and you're asking them the questions that you ask, like, are there levels to, what I'm saying, like how suicidal are they?
Yeah, and that's a very fair question. And that is a question that exists. So yes, there are, and we can use the word degrees. So there are certain degrees that we look for, and there are some very common assessments that are developed to ask questions a certain way to kind of hear these degrees. And 3 of them, and I hope I have colleagues or mutuals that are listening and they might want to add in the chat. I love when other people add things I might be forgetting, but we are listening for the presence of ideations, which is the thought, right? So at any given time, someone could actually be thinking about what it's like not to exist. They could be having dreams about it, or they could be exploring it. And that's purely cognitive. That's the ideation. Then we're listening for intent, which is the planning part. So we're listening for how far you've made it in your mind about this thing, what this follow through is. Because a lot of people have ideations and they will tell you they have no desire to follow through. They just notice they experience intrusive thoughts sometimes about not existing. But we're also listening for any past history of an attempt. So by the time you get to me, if you know that you're having suicidal ideations, I still want to know, have you ever attempted and how long ago was that?
Right.
So there's ideation, there's intent, and then there's previous history. If there's ever been a previous attempt, it increases the likelihood that you're going to do it in the future.
Right.
So if you have ideations, but you don't have intention, you're almost at lower risk. But I hesitate to say that because I don't want you to think that that means that they don't need as much care or attention.
Right.
But there's a different way that we're assessing risk with someone who's attempted before versus someone who's just in an ideation stage. And it's important that everybody understands, and this is a fear that a lot of people have, simply expressing to your mental health provider that you think about it, that alone is not going to make us send you to the hospital.
Right.
So I hope everybody finds a little bit of relief or solace, that just talking about it does not mean we need to admit you, because you're supposed to be talking about it in therapy.
Right.
You're supposed to be working through why you're thinking about it, how long you've been thinking about it, when did this start? What are some of the other thoughts associated? That's what you work through. We're listening for those other markers. If it's growing into a plan, if you have access to the things that you plan on using, we're listening for the things to determine for ourselves as the professional. If we believe that you're going to make an attempt, then yes, we're going to tell you, I don't think that you're safe anymore. It sounds like that you are going to make an attempt, and I need to get you to the hospital.
Right.
So every state has a different code that they would have to use for an involuntary admission. But yeah, so there are degrees. And the 2 assessments that are very popular in Georgia, there might be some in other states. All these letters, y'all.
It's all right. It's all right.
The CSSRS stands for the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. Is a popular one, and there is a brief version of it that comes with a triage. You might even see people in medical offices or hospitals using the CSSRS because there's a triage with a brief one that tells you exactly what to do based on how they answer each question.
Right.
There's an extended version, and the extended version includes any history of self-injury. And I want people to understand self-harm and suicidal ideation are not the same thing. People who participate in self-injury are not trying to end their lives. That's a conversation for another day. But it's important that people understand that self-injury is not about suicide. It is not about ending your life. Self-injury has some other issues, some other origins. But the CSSRS and the ASK questionnaire, ASK, ASK. And most of the suicide severity assessments are typically short and brief, because again, those questions are designed specifically to hear those degrees of separation. And then the way you answer, and they're typically only yes or no. Right. And the way that you answer determines how the assessor moves forward with you.
Right.
But again, even though the questions are yes or no, feel free to elaborate on why you say yes. Nobody's going to stop you from explaining your yes. You always need to advocate for yourself. Right. So I'm always letting my clients know, because it's very common now that we do, both in private practice and in hospitals, it's very common that we will do a risk assessment, even if that's not what you came in for.
Right, right.
So even if you came in for something like anxiety, more times than not, I'm still going to do a severity risk assessment with you,
right? Just
to see.
And that kind of led highly into because my question simply was going to come to this point, determining if a person is high risk. Like how do you guys determine if someone is a high risk? I know you have your way. How does a person on this end determine if they need to say, hey, you know what? I think my cousin is high risk. How do I work that on my end if I'm dealing with someone in that space?
I think
that could be pretty tough, I think.
I think there's probably more than one question that you're actually probably asking. The first thing that comes to my mind is who is it you would need to tell that they're high risk?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering, like, is there a concern that I need to be reporting it or telling somebody based on how risky I think they are?
Right.
as a family or a friend or an associate or a colleague or whatever, you can always provide resources to someone who you are concerned about if you have them.
Right.
And they will be able to tell you if you're on point or not. So of course somebody's gonna be like, "What you talking about, man? Get out of here! Get out of my face with that."
Right.
And then someone else might kind of be like, "No, that's cool, all right," but you still offered it. Now, in terms of you determining if they're high risk, I tread lightly around that because that's kind of not your responsibility
Right.
to determine if they're high risk. But
Not
I think,
medically trained for that.
right, I think the deeper question you're asking is, what do you want to listen out for, or like, what are some of the things you want to be aware of, and how to respond to them. So yeah, and this is the comment I was making reference to earlier when I said you might be surprised at what I say. You can literally ask someone outright, "Are you thinking about ending your life? Are you talking about suicide? Have you been thinking about suicide?" Absolutely ask the question outright.
Right.
And it's important to ask it outright so it does not muddy the water, but it also makes the person you're talking to aware that you're taking what they're saying very seriously.
Right.
So you need them to communicate with you in something very black and white. Like, I need to know if this is what you're sharing with me, because this is what it sounds like. It sounds like you're talking about you don't want to live anymore. Sounds like you're talking about you plan on taking your life. Is this what you're thinking about? So you can absolutely ask. And that's why it sounds a little contradictory, because you might be like, "Lauren, is that the language? Should we just be asking?"
But that's straightforward. So I get it, not muddying the waters, because I think it needs to sound serious. You need to come off as serious when you're addressing the issue.
You also, now again, you're not responsible for how they respond, because everybody will determine for themselves if you are a safe and trusting person they even want to share this with. So people will decide for themselves if they want to answer you honestly or not. And they will protect their thoughts. They will protect their feelings for what's best for them. But asking them outright is important. You also want to avoid what I call insensitive positivity. In other spaces, you might have heard of it called toxic positivity. I choose to say insensitive because I have other issues with the word toxic. But the reason I call it
insensitive
positivity is because sometimes our automatic response is to try to tell people every reason they should live. And everything they should be looking forward to. I promise you, either they have already thought about that, or somebody else has said it and you don't need to repeat it, because those things are not changing how they're feeling.
Yeah.
Those things are not preventing them from having the thoughts. They know those things and they still have the thoughts.
Right.
So trying to minimize the pain that they're feeling and trying to almost compartmentalize that they're talking about ending their life is not actually helpful, although I understand where it's coming from. That's coming from the most loving place in us. But in the case of this kind of conversation, that wouldn't necessarily be helpful.
Right.
So you want to ask them outright. You want to avoid insensitive positivity. You want to follow up with them. So if you all have this conversation, you ask them outright, and we had this awkward moment where we're talking about this really heavy thing, I'm going to circle back to this later. And it's important to do the circle back, because not only does it reinforce that I still took it seriously, even if you told me I was tripping and bugging, I'm going to circle back around just to see.
Just to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard the word insensitive positivity.
Well, you heard it today.
Yeah.
That's right. And thinking about it now, like, how do you avoid that type of judgment? Like, how do you deal with the judgment of it as a therapist? Because I'm sure you have to walk that same line too, of not being too overly positive to a person who is, how do you avoid being judgmental, I guess, is the question I want to ask in that space.
I would actually say those are two different things a little bit, because judgment in this topic could sound something like, you don't have no reason to not want to live. Like, you got this, like you didn't have to deal with what I had to deal with in childhood. So the judgment could sound more like, you have no reason to. I don't understand why you feel like that kind of tone. Whereas someone who's giving like insensitive positivity might have a delivery that sounds like, but there's so much more to look forward to. You haven't seen the whole world yet. This too shall pass. All
Right.
these things are temporary. Just wait till you turn this age. Just wait till you have this experience. You have so much to look forward to. So it's a different tone. One is kind of telling you you have no right to feel that way. And the other one is implying you have more reasons you haven't experienced yet.
Right.
So that's kind of the balancing act that we want to play. And it takes a practice. And again, I think as a friend or a family member, have some grace with yourself that you're not expected to do this perfectly. We understand that this is not second nature for you all. This is something you're trying to implement and incorporate into your routine. So you might not do it as well as you would like, and you're going to feel a little bit bad. But I think it's important to remind yourself, but I am a friend and a family member. I'm doing the best that I can, and I'm actually trying. I'm actually taking the recommendations from professionals. I'm doing the Google research. I'm actually making an effort to be better at this. So it really is a cognitive work of just kind of reminding yourself that you're doing the best you can, that you didn't mean to cause harm, and make sure that you are educating yourself. That's always at the core of it. Don't try something and you know good and well you didn't read enough about it and you didn't talk to a professional and you just said this feels right, or Dr. TikTok told me this is what I'm supposed to do. No, like
you're overly anxious about the issue.
Yeah, do the appropriate reading, talk to the right person, and then implement what you're trying to do for friends. And I'm gonna just plug this in real quick. I'm also a trainer for Mental Health First Aid, which is a national organization. And we train groups and organizations and corporations the same way people have to get trained on first aid and CPR. We train people on mental health first aid. So we teach employees how to respond when they think they have coworkers that are in mental health crisis. So that's a thing. It's a whole thing that people want to learn how to do this and how to do it effectively. So
I mean, that was going to be one of my questions was, you know, how do you, as a person, if you know, like a friend or family member or a loved one that is or have attempted suicide or is in therapy or going through, you know, programs, how do you support? Like, what does that look like as a person trying to be supportive on a day-to-day basis while they're going through something like that? I'm sure you have to like tread lightly or, you know, approach things in different ways. So how does one remain mindful?
I think that's going to be specific to the person, right? So the relationship you have with that person, the way that they communicate, the type of boundaries they have around their mental health and their treatment, that might look a little different. So you might have, let's say you have a sister. I'm gonna give y'all a hypothetical. You have a sister who the family knows has been struggling with mental illness, but historically does not like to speak openly about it, is very private about it, although has gone through programs and take medications, but it is a hard topic. That's the kind of person you might not want to be kind of asking too many questions about or too many questions too about what's happening, but may be very responsive for when you notice progress. So anytime you have an opportunity to offer something validating, like, I know you would rather be doing something else, but it takes a lot of courage to do what you're doing, or you're doing the best that you can every day, and I can see that. So sometimes it's just the offering of validation without an expectation for them to respond. So whenever you can just say something affirming, that can be very supportive. Then you have some friend and family members. So let's say it's a best friend, and it's not blood, but it's a best friend. They might actually want you to check on them and kind of ask them, you know, how's everything going with that program? Or how are you feeling about this new medication? Because I read that sometimes that particular brand can be hard to adapt to. Or how do you like your new therapist? Sometimes it is nice to give people the space to kind of talk about their experience, because it's not going to be a smooth glide. Like sometimes the first prescription is not the best prescription. Sometimes the first therapist is not your best fit. So it could be helpful to kind of ask and check on, how is this going for you? But again, that's going to be so unique for whoever the family member is or the loved one that you have. If they need resources, being a friend or family member that can give them resources really good. So sometimes that looks a little different for every state. But I know in Georgia, we have the Georgia Crisis and Access Line, which people can call. There's also, oh, wait a minute, I actually have a resource list I saved for y'all.
Yeah,
I wanted to make sure I could give y'all some good stuff.
We love it. We love it.
So I want to make you all aware of two organizations that have websites that people can go on. Okay, now I'm mad at myself. I can't find the phone number I was looking for. But the NIMH, I think, is the National Institute of Mental Health, offers a lot of resources. and support and guidance for people who are both living with mental illness or have friends and family loved ones. So they offer options for support groups, phone numbers, education, things like that. So that's NIMH. Also NAMI, which is NAMI, and NAMI stands for the National Alliance of Mental Illness. Same premise. They provide resources and linkages and support groups. They do a lot of family offerings. That's really, really good. Oh, I found the number I was looking for. There is a national number, and it's 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So you can text that number. You would text the number 988, and someone will respond. And I think when you text it, they'll ask you if you would prefer text or if you would prefer a phone call. But again, this is going to be unique to your state because I think every state might have a different number. That's a national one. The 988 number is national. Like I said, for Georgia residents, we have the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. Do you all happen to know what the numbers would be in like Texas or Cali or anything like that?
In Texas, it's nine. I think the one is 988, and then they send you to somebody. I guess that's local. They kind of patch you through to somebody local.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why I think that's the national one because they do exactly what you said. They kind of find the local one for you.
I did Google the one for Cali, but I don't have it before me right now. So, but
it didn't come up.
There you go. 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
So that's the national.
Yes, text 988. They have their official website there. You can actually hit the chat button. You can text 988 and you can actually call 988. So that helps tremendously.
So we've got one for the national, and that let me see. Those specifically work with suicide and crises. I wanted to give you all some more. I mentioned NAMI and I mentioned NIMH. Okay, so there's another text crisis number. And it's a longer one. It's 741-741. And that number, you would just text the word home to 741-741. That's also a crisis text line. If anybody's familiar with that one, let us know if that's national or state, because that's another one I had on my list. And of course, they actually have numbers and tip lines that are in Spanish as well. So if anybody needed that, that's also an option. They have veterans crisis lines. So there's pretty much a support number via text or phone for any crisis or mental illness you're having, but suicide is one of the most prominent ones. Right. And if I remember correctly from some of the stats I saw, suicide was 11th in leading deaths in our country.
Oh, wow.
And I want to say that's been in the recent 2 or 3 years that it ranked number 11 in our country. So it's definitely an issue. It's a problem that we have. And I want to say, and Ken, you can tell me if you saw this, there were 49,000 deaths that were suicide related around 2021 or 2022.
Yeah.
Essentially, it was the equivalent. At the time, it was the equivalent of one suicide like every 11 minutes.
Wow. And I know that's a tough conversation to have with someone. But I think overall, when you're interested in helping your people, you do what you got to do. You use the proper language, educate yourself, and be aware. And I think Ken makes this a habit. And it's crazy because tonight is the topic of the show. Just check on your people.
Mm-hmm.
Check on them. Let them know you're thinking about them. Let them know, you just want to see how they're doing. Most of the time we just check on people when we want something. So I think we got to get out of that habit. I know everybody's dealing with stuff, but we definitely got to get out of the habit of just checking on people when we just want something. Just say hi. Can't hurt.
Someone in the audience asked, has anybody ever dealt with someone who actually has gone through it? And I want to answer that. And this is our show, and I try to be as transparent as possible. And I've expressed this before, and I was talking about it earlier in the show where I started hearing things and I started having to do a self-evaluation of maybe I need some help. And when you were talking about the degrees, that's what I was going through where sometimes throughout my life, I've had the thoughts of what would life be like if I wasn't here, but I never had the idea of how I wanted to do it.
Right.
It was just that thought of, why am I even thinking this?
Right. Right.
And sometimes it would just be because, situations would occur, especially being a young father, with a lot of responsibility in my early 20s, and, just kind of, trying to navigate adulting at certain points was
Right.
hard. And it's like, okay, your mind just starts wandering. And, I got to a point to where I was like, well, maybe things would be better off if I wasn't here. Maybe
Right.
I could
Right.
just get out the way. Maybe, people wouldn't be, thinking this, thinking, you think all kinds of wild stuff sometimes when your
Right.
mind is just
Right.
running rampant. And, during the pandemic, we had a lot of time to be isolated. Even if you were with your family, there everybody was doing their own thing. Even if you were in the same house, everybody was busy
Yeah.
doing their own thing. And for me, I think when I caught COVID, I had a very severe case of it. And at that point it was kind of like, death became very real to me. When you laid up and you feel like you can't breathe, and a lot of people were, at that point were still like, is it real, is it not? And I was like, man, I'm not questioning is it real at all, because
Right. Right. Right.
I experienced it. And then after that fact, that's when those, thoughts start to creep in of, what would happen to me if, what would happen to my family if I wasn't here? And then, there would be things happen, like my daughter got really sick. So, it's just the pressure of things that go on. And I think the pressure of having to shoulder so much and being told, as a kid, you got to be strong. You
Mm-hmm.
don't show no weakness, and things of this nature. But it's like at the end of the day, it's like, man, I need to talk to somebody.
Right.
I need
Right.
help unpacking all this stuff. And I always use this example of a backpack. We travel through life with a backpack, and there's things that we keep putting in that backpack throughout our lives. At some point, that backpack gets too heavy, and you need somebody to help you unpack it. Because imagine yourself with a bag on your back, trying
And
to
it's
reach in, and grab the stuff out. You can't reach in and grab that stuff out like this. You need the person behind you to reach in the bag for you. And that's when you go to a counselor. That's when you go to a therapist, because talking to your family and friends, that might
cool.
work a little
Out
bit.
there. Right.
But when things get to a certain point, you need some professional help. So don't be afraid to make that call. If you're having these thoughts, if you need help, reach out to somebody who can help you. Make the phone call to the 988 if you're having the suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideations. And even if you don't think that it's, to that point for you to do that, I would err on the side of caution and rather to be safe than
Sure.
sorry.
Right. Right.
But Lauren could tell you more about that. But I mean, that's just my suggestion, because I never thought I would be having those type of thoughts in my life. I never thought that I
Right.
would be, in a position where I needed to, seek therapy or seek counseling. But when things
Yeah.
happen, your kids get sick, your kids be affected by things, things going around you. You never can tell. So,
Right.
but that's my spiel on it, because Big Ken needed some help too. So
Right.
don't be afraid, because if
It, yeah.
if I could do it, what I'm saying, anybody could do it. You know what I'm saying? Make that call and reach out for some help.
Now mine, I was 19, and I had no 18, and I had just received my mom's death insurance money. Large, huge lump sum of money, and everybody became my friend, family wise, like a lot of family. And I think the only person at that time, shout out to my brother, because he wouldn't let aunts, uncles, all of them take advantage of me with all of this money. And I remember him really kind of being there, right? But I saw a different side to people who said that they loved me. Like, it was a whole different ballgame. And the sharks came out because I'm 18. I don't know what to do with this money. So, you know, and plus the weight of how it came, why I got it, brought up even more emotion, having to deal with all of that stuff. But, you know, as a young kid, you're thinking, you know, you just go do what you want to do. You know what I mean? You got loads of money in your pocket, you know. Ken know, living down there in South Dallas. South Dallas is wild, right? And everyone changed. And I noticed everyone changed. And so now you got tons of people in your face who you had never seen or even really acknowledged before. And I remember one day, my biological dad showed up when I got that money. And I don't ever remember really seeing him or talking to him or anything like that. I think that's probably one of the first times I really saw him. And he just didn't look well. Like, we got in the back of my cousin's car, and here he's giving his spiel, and, you know, and everybody's asking for money because they know I got the money. They know what's going on. And I just saw a different side to a lot of people, man. And nobody, when that money was gone, and trust me, everybody started taking money. Everybody want money. People who you ain't seen in forever want money. And it was interesting. And I remember saying to my brother when all the money was gone, and it went quick. I was sitting down with my brother, and I just told him, bro, I don't even want to live no more. Like, we've talked about this, me and him, and he remembers that moment. And he was like, nah, I gotta get you out of here. So that kind of prompted, you know, my uncle and my aunt coming to get me, you know, later on down the line. But having somebody by your side to help you in this process is a game changer. Because I know at 18 years old, I just didn't want to do life anymore. And it was partly because of the people that I was associated with. And I felt the same way. Like, man, I'd be straight not being here having to deal with y'all. You get what I'm saying? You know, the two-facedness and all of these things. And that was a moment I don't think I've ever forgotten. But I also, the biggest thing I think that kept me in that moment was, you know, my brother saying, hey, you know what? Nah, we can't, we're not rolling like this. And so that was, and I remember one of his quotes, he said, I don't know how I would take it. I've already lost my mama. I've already lost baby brother. If I lose you, he was like, I don't even know if I want to be here. So all of that, when you compile all of that together, you start to think, yeah, and it kind of shifts your perspective a little bit. So that was my moment. So
it doesn't shift it a little bit, it shifts it a lot.
A whole bunch, right.
I think people would be surprised. Just as talking about it, you're probably surprised. I think a lot of people would be surprised that it does not take a lot to have that type of thought. It can be one major life change.
Right.
And you will start thinking about this in a way that you never had before. So in the spirit of check on your people, on the one hand, yes, if you know someone that's living with clinical depression or one of the depressive disorders, because there's more than one, then yes, there's a safe, reasonable risk for you to just kind of want to check on their mental health, especially if they're taking medication. But outside of that, we need to be checking in with the people we love who are unemployed, because suicidal ideations increase in unemployment. It's a socioeconomic hardship. We need to be checking on our people who have lost their children or lost a parent, because those types of grief can also increase suicidal ideations. The elderly for several years had the highest risk of suicide. Even more so, people who have lost a spouse or life partner in later life. So not only the elderly in general, but elderly who have lost their life partner. Suicide ideations increase greatly. And then, of course, you have scenarios, unfortunately, anyone that you know who is serving jail time or prison time or about to serve time. That's a very real thing they think about. There are people who will very seriously consider suicide instead of having to do any jail or prison time. So there are all these other ways that suicide comes up and becomes a predominant issue outside of having a mental health disorder. And that's where checking on people is important.
Got to do that. Got to check on your people, man. I know it sounds cliche because we're on it tonight, show tonight, but to be honest, man, like I think it's mandatory, and ultimately, I think uh, individually, yeah, I know I gotta do better. So there's a few people I need to check on myself. So
But I also want to talk about go back to kind of like with my experience. When we start noticing things in ourselves, right?
hmm
A lot of times, we like we're talking about checking on other people, but a lot of times, if I mean, people probably can attest to this. If you're the checker,
Mm.
a lot of times people ain't checking on you, or
very true,
you're the
very true.
strong person. People
Right.
ain't checking on you. You're doing all the checking. So Lauren, like, what can people do? I guess as a self assessment, or some things that we could do for ourselves to make sure that we kind of keep ourselves in check.
I hate to sound redundant, but some of that is going to be how willing are you to even ask for help? How willing are
Yeah.
you to even admit or verbalize that you're having the thoughts, especially if you have been the checker? Sometimes we adopt that role and we will give ourselves a hard time, like, I can't have anything wrong
I
because
gotta
of
be
you.
strong. Right.
So first you got to ask yourself, how willing are you to even ask for help or tell people that you're not okay? Because if you're not willing to do that, you're probably in far more pain than you're admitting that you're in. Um, then, of course, be willing to see a professional, be open to talking to someone. I would also say take a look at what has changed in your life, because some of that stuff is circumstantial. And you might have to ask yourself, okay, is this short term? Like, am I going to have a solution for this and it's going to change how I feel? Or is having a solution for this actually not going to change how I feel and I do need more professional help? So if we think about unemployment, for example, do I know at some point I will be able to earn money? At some point, I'm going to get a job. It's just taking me a really long time, and I don't know how I'm going to pay rent. Then resolving that suicidal thinking is going to be directly related to your ability to earn money to live in the
Right.
world.
Right. Right.
So being able to be honest about it, seeking professional help, but then also solving some of the socioeconomic or life issues, but also having a healthy community, right? So I talk about therapy a lot because I'm a therapist, I'm biased, but a community and a support network is probably better for some people than even therapy is. So
Right.
having a community of other people that you feel like these are the people I can turn to who either have been through this or share this experience or understand it is supremely helpful, which is why support groups are underutilized. They are
Right.
not taken advantage of enough. Some people thrive in support groups more than they do in individual therapy. And I
But
will
I'm
oftentimes,
sorry to cut you off, but why would you think that is that happens, that they would be more successful in a support group or sitting down with a therapist? Why do you think? Is it just a comfortable thing, a comfort thing?
it's the sameness and relatability. So in individual therapy, sometimes it feels like the therapist is trying to convince me of these things and I don't really have
Mhm.
evidence. Whereas in a support group, everybody's at a different stage in their process. So I can see that there's validity to what's being said because John over there is living proof and Sarah over there is halfway through. And then Bill is worse than I am. So it's like everyone in the group is able to model something different and realistic. So it's more believable. There's more hope in a group setting. Group settings are just powerful in their own way. And
Right.
of course, in a clinical support group, that's one way, but you can have support groups in other ways. A lot of people have small groups in their faith based worship communities.
Right.
Some people do groups that are connected to social media interests. That's become a big thing. People are connecting to these groups through IG and Facebook for similar liked interests. But having community is such a big deal. And I don't think we realize that. We don't talk about it enough how just having healthy, like minded people around you can sometimes be the missing piece. But again, it's important to understand they are not the professionals, they are not trained. So you have to be very cognizant about what you're expecting from the people in your community because they're not always equipped depending on where you're getting that support from. So
Very
just be mindful, where am I seeking the support? How am I building the community? And what level of expertise am I looking at here?
Makes
One
sense. Makes
one
total
thing
sense.
one thing that was key to me, and one thing that I was told that sticks with me each and every day is, when it comes to suicide, somebody explained to me, don't try to solve a temporary problem with a permanent solution, right? Like Lauren was saying, a lot of things that you kind of assess and you say, okay, with this thing that's causing me to think about taking my own life, it's a temporary problem, right? It's gonna go away, or it can go away, but I'm gonna apply a permanent solution to it, because once I take my life, there's no coming back for that,
Right.
right? That's it. That's a final solution to it. And when I have had conversations with people that have expressed these type of things, and of course I explain to them, hey, I'm not an expert, but because you're saying these type of things, this is what I can tell you to kind of think about.
Right.
And a few of them, when they heard me say that, it kind of struck a chord. It's like, man, you so right. Like this, this is just temporary, right? So I need to take that in and let that sit with me for a while, because I understand that, tomorrow when I wake up, I might be thinking totally different. And I want to point out something too. And one thing that I've heard people say, or be suicidal before, and I've had to have conversations with, and it had to do with relationships.
Mm,
Somebody breaks up with somebody they've been in a relationship with for a long time, and then they just lose it, and they're like, I just don't want to live no more. I love her, I love him, blah blah. And you just have to be honest with them. I understand how you feel. I'm not saying that your feelings are not valid,
invalid. Right.
but guess what? There's another guy out there. There's another woman out there. It's gonna take some time, but you'll get over it.
Right.
And sometimes those people have come back to me months later and like, man, I'm glad I talked to you that day, because man, I found out a whole bunch of stuff about that girl, and then it's like you would have taken your life
Over that. Right.
over that girl, and none of that's worth it. You know what I'm saying? Because there's always somebody else out there for you, right?
Right.
So but that's one of the examples that I've heard numerous times, and I'm like, dude, girl, like
Not worth it. Right.
it's not worth it to take your life because of a person, right? So, but at the same time, as Lauren stated earlier, you don't know, because you're not an expert, people's mental state,
Right.
right? And some of the things that you're saying make logical sense to you because you're thinking logically. But if they're experiencing like a mental episode or something like that, they're not trying to hear it. They're not trying to hear none of that. And sometimes they've already, registered that, and they still want to go ahead and do what they're trying to do. So, it's just one of those things where you can't help everybody all the time. There's gonna be, some instances where, people are successful at their attempt, and that's just, part of the journey, part of life. You can't help everybody.
And I want to
So
say something about the mental illness, and you don't know what you don't know. Somebody out there listening to this needs to know, or they know someone who needs to know this. Some of you actually do need medication. So although we've been talking about these other ways to support and these other ways to get support, some of you do need medication. And I know that is such a stigmatizing idea, and
Right.
people don't want to have to go that route, because yes, taking medication can be rocky when your brain and body are trying to adjust to whatever the prescription is you've gotten. But there are some people living with disorders and mental illnesses that are so intrusive that it is hard for them to get through each day. So I have some clients who, when I start working with them early in their treatment experience, I can tell early on that they are having so much difficulty between sessions that they
Mhm.
can't even really integrate the interventions I'm teaching them, because every day or every other day they are struggling with this feeling and with
Right.
this thought. And those are times when you truly do need medical intervention, because you can't even apply what you're getting in therapy. You can't even build the community and network. You have no desire to reach out. Some of you all do have to take that step. And I know you don't want to, but you need to.
Need to. Right. So Laura, let me ask this: a person goes through a program. How do you determine if that person is okay? They've went through a program. Maybe they've gotten meds. How do I or you know, as a professional, me as a novice, how do I know, or how should I operate in the idea that they are okay? How do I assess that?
There are two like blanket things that I would say, and of course there's always more to something. But the
Right.
assessments that I referred to before, like the ASK assessment and the CSSRS, you would compare their answers. So those are assessments they would take again. And sometimes it can be taken like quarterly, or that you can assign a time period for how often
Right.
you're doing this assessment. So assessment measures and the changing in some of these scores give an indication on if there's progress and improvement. But also the client's ability to maintain life on life terms
Right.
also shows you that there's a change. So the things that they were struggling to manage before treatment or at the earlier parts of treatment compared to the end gives you some data there as well. So you're
Yes.
comparing how were they managing this thing. And some of those things might be how were they managing interpersonal relationships, career, education, social life. So there are these like key areas, and you would
Right.
compare how they're doing in that. And yet, still, self report is one of the biggest indicators of how
Mhm.
someone is feeling and if they're doing better. Again, if somebody was living with suicidal ideations and thoughts of not existing, and they're talking about it up front, and they have an honesty about it, they have no problem talking about feeling better. They have no problem saying, you know what, I haven't thought like that in 6 weeks. Or they might say something like, I only had one thought like that in 4 weeks. So if they're talking upfront about it when they are not okay, they're going to talk forthcoming about it when they are okay.
Right.
So it seems very, I think listening to it sometimes it seems very simple. Compare the assessments, compare the life categories, listen to the self-report. But again, the client is the expert on their own life.
Right. Right. Right.
So
I
they
like that. I
they
like
can
that.
articulate what's happening inside of them better than I can assess it a lot of
Right.
times. But that's why we have the measures. You use the assessment tools, you evaluate the life categories, and you take the self-reports. And this
I like
stuff.
that. I like that. She see y'all. She know what she's talking about. I'm telling you. And it don't. You could. It just comes together. It ain't like thrown together. Thrown bits and pieces. It comes together in full, comprehensible sentences.
I feel like you're taking a shot at somebody. Somebody listening got shot by Benji just a second ago. Because I don't know, I just feel like you're thinking about somebody who is not
Well, there are so
fully
many. There's
comprehensible.
I mean, you know how many Facebook experts be
there's
popping up.
experts everywhere, and between Facebook, IG, TikTok, everybody's an expert, but they're not an expert.
And
So
when you got hundreds, you got hundreds of thousands of followers. Trust me, people be saying some interesting stuff.
Well, I hope
yeah,
there's some other mental health professionals that watch this episode and share additional things. Like I said, I love consulting with peers and talking with colleagues and sharing insights and sharing new ideas. So hopefully somebody sees this and they go like, and Lauren mentioned this and there's this other thing. And you all didn't talk about, like, I love that because it's like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And that's a good point too.
yeah.
Now we had a lady on before, and I know we're going to get ready to get out of here in a minute. But she talked about Dr. O, and we had her on, and she mentioned functional depressive. Like, how do we deal with that? How do you deal with a person Because I grew up around a lot of men who were functioning alcoholics. Like, they had to have it. How do you deal with that space in your life if you got somebody around your life that's like that?
Tell me what you mean when you ask, how do you deal with it if it's somebody you're talking about, the person who's not.
Like if it's like let's say it's your uncle.
Mhm.
Like your uncle is functioning, but he's, whether it be depressive, alcoholic, shoot, I don't know what other triggers is out there. Them the only two that come to my head right now. But how do you deal with that type of person? Because that's you love him, but he comes in drunk every night.
Mhm. So if you're the family or loved one, you have to redefine your boundaries because number one, we can't force people to change if they don't want to and if they don't think they have a problem.
Right.
So if there is something that they're dealing with and it is intruding on your health and wellness, that could be mental health, emotional health, total well-being, your safety, security, you are then responsible to redefine your own boundaries with this person. So
Right.
you decide how much access they have to you. How often am I going to talk to this person? How often are they allowed in my home? What conversations am I willing to engage with them, and where am I going to have to end the phone call? So as the friend or loved one, you have to set a boundary because you can't make them do anything they don't want to do.
Right.
Now, in terms of what typically can help that person, Sometimes what I've seen can be helpful is when let's use the alcoholism as an example, right? But I'm still living in the world, earning money, paying my bills. I don't see the problem, right?
Right.
Sometimes if they hear someone that's completely unconnected to them, describe them without describing them. So it's like you talking about me, but you're not even talking about me.
Mhm.
Sometimes it makes people go, oh. So it makes me think of Ken, how you were describing, you were thinking about and talking to people who were struggling until you realize, okay, wait a minute, I'm struggling with some of these things.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's hearing somebody describe exactly how you're living, and then you realize, oh, there's a word for that? Oh, that's not
Right.
okay. Like that's
Right.
unhealthy. We, interestingly enough, we are far more receptive to people we don't know, which is why a lot of people go to therapy because they would rather go to somebody. We're far more receptive to people that we don't know than people that we do. So if my family or friend is telling me that I have a problem with drinking, I'm probably gonna resist it because I feel like I don't know what you're talking about. Y'all see me all the time. I'm good. I got a job. I got a house. I got a car. Like, what's the problem? But when somebody else describes your life to you, and they say this is why this is a problem, then it can make you go, The same thing with what you were describing as functional depression. Someone else will describe some symptoms that you're having, and you had no idea that that's what those symptoms meant, and then it'll make you go, oh. So it's not just about how much money I'm earning, and I'm able to keep a house, and I'm able to pay all my bills, and I have fun. Oh, it's not just about that. Oh, like depression can look like that too. It'll make people stop. It can be like, oh, you can be depressed and everything look good in your life. Absolutely. But it takes sometimes for them to hear it from somebody else, which is what, and that reminds me, it was very trendy in the last, I want to say 3 to 5 years, where people started talking about how depression looks different in Black women than it does in women of other races, because oftentimes depression in Black women is perceived as anger, irritability and quick temperedness and aggression, and just recognizing that some of the things that we have associated with depression has actually been very specific to one subgroup of people. And if that's what I thought depression is, well, I don't look at myself as having that
And having been depressed. Right.
until
You
somebody
just
says,
labeled as the angry Black woman.
yeah,
So
somebody will
that's
say, okay, this is what depression can look like too. And then you're like, oh, that sounds like me.
right.
And then it makes people stop and go, okay, I might need to talk to somebody.
Hey, yo, that's solid information. I mean, that's what we do here on the Fiyah Session, right?
Yeah, and first of all, we really want to thank Lauren for joining us on this episode, because every time she joins us, she always brings a wealth of information
Bring
and
the fire.
good insight, and trustworthy information. That's most important. And she has a genuine heart for wanting to help people. So kudos to her, and we truly appreciate her taking time to do this, because we always want to support our viewers, and we know people out there who, again, who are suffering, and a lot of people are suffering in
Yeah.
silence. And just being able to put some content out like this, hopefully will help somebody. You know what I'm saying? If it's not for you, maybe it's somebody that needs to help, but maybe we can
Facts.
help somebody somewhere, somehow. That's what it's all about here at the Fiyah Session. So before we get up out of here, we just got to make sure that we give Lauren an opportunity to have some final words, and to let you know where to find her on social media. Lauren, take it away.
Social media is hilarious.
So I recently revamped my website and I'm very proud of it. So if you have time, please go to freethemindtherapy.com.
I'm going to go right now and invite some friends to go check it out. Free the Mind
Therapy, freethemindtherapy.com. So go to my website and you'll see some of the services that I offer. You can fill out the information sheet. And depending on what you need, I'll send you an email response. We might talk about a consultation or kind of work out something for your organization or set you up with a group. I'm hesitant to share social media because I have not been diligent about keeping up to date with my professional social medias. But on both Facebook and IG, I am Free the Mind Therapy. So
Yeah.
if you see that name, and I think my lovely face is the thumbnail for both. So if you see Free the Mind Therapy and you see my face attached, it's most likely me. And don't throw me any shade if the last post I put up was from 2023. I don't want to hear it. I already know.
She's like, I do, yeah, whatever, right?
I already know. But if you know someone who knows someone who you think would benefit from therapy, you can find me on Psychology Today. And I do accept several different types of insurance. I also
Yes.
accept cash. You can also find me on Grow Therapy. On Grow Therapy, if you don't see my biography, it just means I am at capacity with Grow. So I might not be accepting any new clients there, but you can also find my information on Psychology Today. So look me up, especially if you're interested in group. I want more people to take advantage of group because I don't think they realize how powerful and helpful it can be.
That's dope. That's dope.
Yeah,
Free the mind there. Free the mind. Free the mind.
I
Get
I,
there. Get
I
the
think the
club.
group therapy is a great thing because all too often when people have conversations about things like suicide or anything, any type of mental health issues or anything to that fact, it's always helpful to find somebody else who has similar issues, so you don't feel by yourself and you have a built-in kind of support system with people who understand what you're going through because they're going through the same thing. So yeah, y'all make sure y'all reach out. I put the website in the comments so
Yeah.
you all can go to her website and yeah, get the help that you need, or provide that information to somebody else and they can get the help they need, because that's what we're all about here, trying to get people the information they need.
Mhm.
Facts.
Benji Banks, the man, the brand, talk to the people.
Man, this was enlightening. Again, always this is a trifecta for Lauren. Like every time she's come on, she's done an exceptional job. And I say this every time. Ken know what my favorite episode is. Every time we ask for a re-air, I always ask for the first episode that we did with Lauren and Angel Adams.
But what did
Uh,
I say that made it so good?
A lot.
Listen, first off, if you remember, you was a little sick at the time, so I called
Uh-huh.
you Rick Ross.
I had cooties.
Right. It like the whole from the funny to the serious. And that was our first mental health episode. And so for me to get that information out there like that was like, and the interview was dope. Like I think it was probably one of my best interviews in terms of staying on point. Cause sometimes I be but that topic was amazing and I love it. And I love absolutely every time we get an opportunity to run it. I tell Kim, like, yo, like run out. But it's the information in it. And when you go back and listen to it, the information that you guys gave us and to the audience, it was dope. Concise, clear, precise. You don't talk and stumble over your words that much neither. So it's like you know what you're talking about. So you can tell you're inept in there. So, but man, I just enjoyed the episode. Shout out to you. Shout out to Ken. Shout out to the platform. Shout out to Patricia. Shout out to everybody that supports. Y'all keep supporting. Continue to share this. Follow us. Follow the Fiyah Session. Invite your friends to the page, and continue to keep coming for this dope content.
All right, and where can the people find you at, Benji?
I mean, man, they find me on everywhere. For right now, listen, if you in Moreno Valley, if you in the Inland Empire, just pull up on your boy at the beauty shop. You know what I'm saying? We got braid lady, the lock lady in that joint. We're gonna have, some nails stuff coming up, trying to get a barber in that joint so we can get Ken hooked up with his man unit. You know what I'm saying? He gonna do a promo video for you, boy. You know what I'm saying? So just all of those fun things, man. Man, we out here, we're working and we try to do it. Appreciate the grace that God has given us and try to operate in that space and do it right. You know what I mean? So, and you can't miss me on Facebook. All y'all be on there clowning. So, you know what I'm saying? Look your boy up, Benji Banks. You can't miss me. I'm there.
Facts, facts, facts. Well, y'all already know y'all can catch me at Big Ken on Fire on all social media platforms. If you're on Facebook, just type in Big Ken. I pop right up. Please go to YouTube, like and subscribe our YouTube channel. Hit that little bell notification so you can be notified every time we post new content, every time we go live, and so you can jump in the comments. We are thankful again for Lauren for joining us, and the only thing I can leave you with is, again, stop applying permanent solutions to temporary problems. We do it too much. We worry too much. One day at a time. Just
One
worry
day at a
about
time.
one day at a time. Today is the day. That's all you can do. We appreciate you all tuning in. Y'all already know we love y'all. We support y'all. And we'll be back next week with another dope episode live. So come join us and jump in these comments because we love to have you. All right.
Facts.
We appreciate y'all. We love y'all. Y'all already know what it is. It's the Fiyah Session.
Fiyah Session.
Peace.
Deuces. Go me.
Thank you for tuning in. Please make sure you follow us on all social media platforms.